get started.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you all just for being here. Thank you for being so welcoming here. I'm Thad. You know, the Dr. Johnson guy's boring, so just call me Thad. I'm part of a 3-member team that includes my wife, Dr. Natasha Johnson. I say that's the real Dr. Johnson, never introduced her. She's the brains behind the outfit. And the former BGS director, William Sable. And we do a lot of this work together. We work with Lynn and CJI. Some reports that are about to come out here soon. And the one thing that I say is that we stick to the data and we follow the evidence. In this work, it's easy to become full of yourself, and you have principles and things that you worked on years on, where you have a lot of skin in the game, and it becomes self-edifying. Well, people don't need us to be self-edifying. People need us to try to discover the truth and the best way to help them. You have community members who are suffering. Your families who are suffering. You know, I'm from Memphis and I know the demographic is quite different. But I talked to my mom and she's like, you know, I did a talk one time and she said, you know, we're being safe down here. And then I talked to her the other day, just a couple days before we got here, and said, you know, we're talking about, we're going to Memphis to do some work with the mayor, and she was so excited, and she felt, I guess, some sense of hope, right, that we'd be able to come down and just kind of work, and that the mayor was open to doing these things. But she said, you know, we don't feel safe going out, even in the daytime, and we don't feel safe in our homes, and we moved out the hood. Like, we're not in South Memphis anymore, and just that overwhelming sense of fear that has our citizens imprisoned in their own homes, not to mention the people who are the actual personal victims of these crimes. And so, let me tell you before I tell you who I am, because that's not really important. I'll tell you who I am so you know that at least I'm qualified to talk to you, or at least semi-qualified. But this is our approach to justice. I believe in accountability, because oftentimes in this space we can be focused so much on salvaging the lives of offenders, because, you know, oftentimes they've been victimized. Right? There's many much of the victims as the people that they victimize. They have trauma in their lives, right? However, we cannot forget the victims when we're talking about reform. We have to advocate for justice for our victims, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also it helps cut off the victim-offender overlap. So it's so important that that's the sense that we take, but also we believe in a system that holds people accountable. But we also see the beauty in salvaging people's lives and not destroying it. And we talked about yesterday, when you've paid your debts to society, how much is enough? Is there even a such thing as re-entry or reintegration from groups who have been socially excluded from birth? So we have to be really mindful of these things when we're thinking about the most actionable reforms and be realistic about the backdrop that we have. And so that's where we're coming from. And we try to stick to the data and yet try to fill in the gaps in between. But as Natasha always says, you know, when you look at these data points, I'm going to show you a bunch of data, and I'm going to talk through it. So if it's, hopefully I'm Morgan Freeman with the narration over that, and you're immersed in the data, because I think the data itself is powerful enough, and it doesn't need me to moonwalk or do anything to kind of relay it to you all. Now, a little bit about myself. Black boy from South Memphis, Tennessee. Grew up in a family where pretty much we had adverse contacts with the police system, the justice system. We had those tableside talks. I had that black mother who said, the police pull you over, it's not because I necessarily respect law enforcement, I just want you to come back home. That's the type of backdrop that I grew up in. I became a police officer, God knows how that happened. I needed a job, I didn't want to be on the streets, right? And it was something that, like, wow, I really have a heart for this. And as a police officer, I worked my way up to captain. I did use of force training, defensive tactics, firearms instructor, and also trained in special operations. And so, and one reason that I left law enforcement is that even though I know how important it is, and my heart goes out to those doing that hard work, but I felt like me personally, there needed to be more that I could offer. The first gentleman that I arrested, his ID had Flynn Dixie Road. That was the street behind my grandmother's house. So I'm coming to the contact with people who, the only difference between me and them is the decision that they made. The only difference between me and them is that maybe I had a 2-parent household. The only difference between me and I had a non-familiar mentor or somebody in my life, right? So the people who I see that are victims, the people that I see as offenders, I see myself. whether they're black, white, or what have you. And so, I'm telling you this, I want you all, as I'm talking, to just suspend your disbelief for a minute, because there's a complete story that we have here. And kind of what I want to cover today, I want to get a chance to cover everything. You all, we will make these slides available to you all. I do want to spend some time talking about the challenge that we're up against. You know, we have these great ideas and great principles, but guess what? This is hard work, and it takes commitment for the long run. Even commitment that may extend beyond the political offices that are in power right now. We have to take a humane approach to this. This is a human condition. And I'm going to be presenting data that is national data. And of course, you know, Hispanic data, I'm just to say this, it sucks in this nation. The UCR didn't start collecting arrest data until 2013. And to this day, about a third of the data is still missing. In Florida, who has a high Hispanic population, they hadn't reported arrests for the last 20 years. So we still don't know a lot. I even show a slide where we talk about looking at the declining Hispanic-white disparity. Based on data, either they're being treated the same or it's three to four times the rate of white people. It's a lot we don't know, but it's a lot that we do know. And so even though when you see a lot of these stats that they talk about black to white and these things, well, the black in this scenario is just a representation of whoever the marginalized group, the most underserved group is in your community. And I'll tell you, you know, when you're looking at different groups, I'll show you some slides about the victimization rates for homicides. The two highest groups, black and Hispanic. And our Native American brothers and sisters are not having a good go of it either. So also, we're going to talk about racial disparities in the justice system processing. Things have gotten better. But where we're being sticky at with disparities is balance. And we want to talk about, look, I believe in having hard conversations and saying things that are not popular. There's things you probably shouldn't say out in public, but guess what? If we're really here to keep our community safer, we got to get past ourselves and have these hard conversations. Because these conversations are not nearly as hard as the times these people in the communities that we're trying to help are having right now. And this is where I'm coming from. Also, I want to spend more time talking about how do we address it. We kind of know the problem, so we need to talk about how can we really address it. And there's no cookie cutter approach, but there are principles that you can take and you can apply. And let me tell you, a lot of things that I see that you all are doing and are trying to do and are boasting that people are doing, it gives me a lot of hope, because a lot of these things align with the principles that I see as important. It's based on research, science, and theory, and also talking to people who are dealing with these same issues beyond my own family. And then lastly, I hope we get a chance to talk about it, but there have been post-pandemic changes in residential migration and the changing geographies of crime and victimization. We had a piece that came out just moments ago in Time. So if we don't get a chance to talk about it, you know, you all can find that link and read more in detail, but let me tell you, when they tell us that crime is going down in cities, they're not lying, but y'all gonna tell me that crime is just disappearing and violent crime is disappearing? If you look at the chart that I hope I get a chance to show you, you'll see that, wow, okay, it's going down in cities, but the suburbs, in rural areas, they're not those safe havens that they once used to be. And so we can't take pre-pandemic strategies, urban-centric strategies for combating violent crime and helping community safety in a post-pandemic world. How long would it take us to get out of that mess? And our people will continue to struggle. So this is what the approach I'm taking today. I think I want to talk for about maybe 40, 45 minutes, and hopefully nobody falls asleep. And I want to hear from you all and have some Q&A. So if somebody says when I start talking about 30 minutes, it's an A guy, and there's time to shut up and let us talk, please feel free to do so, all right? But this is I plan on learning from you all as well. So let's start with this. Everything in our systems are connected, right? And so when we're thinking about reform, we have to think about the process. If we talk about justice system processing, from how they get in there, how they are treated, how they are processed, how they are treated once they're inside these facilities. I just mentioned yesterday that public safety doesn't stop at the prison door. We have a right, when they ask people, well, who's your community? Oh, you know, the grandma, the school. Oh, not the unsheltered population? Not the people that's sitting in your jails right now? That's part of our community. I ask community members, who's your community? Oh, you know, the grandma down the street. What about the police officer? whose the only difference is that he has a uniform on and almost an impossible job to do. So this is why we talk about it and take this approach. So, mind you, these are the imprisonment rates in state prisons nationally, is what I'm talking about, from 2000 to 2020. These are on different axes. As you'll see, for instance, the white rate goes up to 45 for public order, but the black rate on this side goes up to 220. This is here to kind of illustrate why we see the declining gaps, okay? So if you look over here, if you all can see, this top green line is drug imprisonment. Drug imprisonment dropped from 15 to 1 to roughly in 2020 around 3 to 4 to 1, right? It dropped significantly. And so we're not quite out of the war on drugs game, but the war on drugs that we saw in the 80s and 90s, I want to say at least in our cities, it's no more. Now we have some research that shows that may not be the case in our suburban and rural areas, but we know those tend to also be the areas where we see synthetics, where opioids tend to run rampant, and they, yes, diffuse into the cities. But those have been the places that have been hit hardest. So that makes sense. We try to use data to make sense of the world around us and what's the consistent thread. Now, if you look, property crime is the lowest in 2020. The highest disparity that we have is violent offenders and violent offenses. And if you notice, it's been really sticky for the last couple of years. This also raises the question, when you're talking about what's equity or how you measure disparity, in a capitalistic backdrop, politicized, racialized backdrop like America, what is parity when you have systemic inequities? So maybe parity is 5 to 1. Maybe it's the best that we can get with how we're doing things. Now, mind you, too, this decline that we see over here, about 50% of that could be explained by differential changes in population. Now, this is black-white that we're talking about. The black population grew at 33% over this period. The white population grew at 7%. So it's also a mathematical formula. So we were able to conclude that only 50% of the change was due to what we were doing. And now we have areas to pinpoint to understand post-release, what's going on in communities. What about post-arrest decisions? So these are the things that makes us start looking at these things. And as you see here, for violence, you see it drop precipitously right here, but still, look at the rates. It's about 1,000, a little bit less than 1,000 per 100,000 adults for imprisonment. And for whites, it's around between 155, about 150. I'm sorry, 157 or something like that. Right, so it's still, we talk about the imprisonment rate, it's still a big gap there, and that explains why we see that 5 to 1 number. Now, the Hispanic white gap. If somebody says, hey, what's the gap between Hispanics and whites? I can say, I don't know. Because we have two ways of collecting data. I know collecting data is a big issue here. We could probably have a whole workshop, right, on how do you collect data and the best ways to do so. We kind of briefly had this discussion yesterday. We have a report that's coming out. I'm the co-author on this report. I will say that Bill Sable is the real expert. I spoke with him earlier and said that you need to come to Mexico and talk about this measurement issue, because he understands it a lot more deeply than I do. But this is what I can tell you. This is the imprisonment disparity rate. So this line here, the purple line, this is using federal data for state prisons and how the feds collect this data. This is using the National Prisoner Survey. What the National Prisoner Survey does, states take observer. So see somebody see me, okay, black guy with dreads, okay, he's black. I could be Latinx, I'll get out, right? What's funny, I grew up in Memphis, so either everything was black, white, Mexican, or Chinese. That's how ignorant we were, right? And so I went to New York with my wife, and I'm on the train, and I see a guy just as black as I am, and he is speaking fluent Spanish. I'm like, it blew my mind, right? And that's my first really introduction to wow, race and ethnicity, there's a cross there. And we need to understand it. And now we're into this research, so we find that there's self-reporting, some states do, and some states just do observer report, where the observer sees who it is. Now, the observer report is really good because that can really help us understand if there's inequities in how people are being treated based on how people perceive them. But if you include, like the NPS does, so the bottom line is just observer reported data. What the federal government with BJS did with the NPS, they had the observer-reported data, and they also had the self-reported data. And they used the self-reported data to weight up the measure. So that gives us two different outcomes. So today, the Hispanic to white ratio in state and prisons is either about 1-to-1, meaning they're being treated comparably to white people, or it's 3 to 4 to 1, meaning they're being incarcerated at 3 to 4 times the rate of white people. I mean, excuse my language, but damn, we need to figure that out, right? This is our national data source. And so this shows that we can't really depend on the federal government to get this quick, fast, timely, accurate data. This is where the states come in. And I think the states for too long have been left out of this value reduction conversation and are well positioned, perhaps even more than the federal government, to really understand the needs of their people. Now, this is back to the black-white, but again, remember, whatever the area you're in, this is probably the demographics are, whoever the black, quote-unquote, black people are, group in your communities, these trends and trajectories and these conditions seem to be the same. So let me quickly explain this. Using the National Crime Victim Survey, this is the UCR arrest data. This here for violent crimes. This red line is the NCV data that tells about the offending, when people identify offenders. This convergence that you see right here tells us that it's not necessarily differential treatment. It is differential involvement in victimization and offending. Let me say that one more time, because this is something that we are afraid to have these conversations. In black and brown communities, there is differential victimization and violent offending. And not many of these communities are broken. These people are not animals. But systemic inequities impact your trajectory. And we have to get past, like, is it our fault in this room? No, but guess whose problem it is? It's our problem, right? And so this is a big issue. And so we can't really reduce disparities in state imprisonment for violent offending if we don't address violent victimization and offending. People just don't walk up to the jails and say, hey man, I need to be incarcerated for 10 years. They get there. And we have to figure out on the front end, how can we, because look, we can't ask the justice system to solve all the world's problems. We have for far too long. And the justice system is much more expansive than just cops, courts, and corrections. This group here shows, I love what the representative said. She said, we are the real crime fighters. Crime fighters is a much bigger group than we actually think. And I won't get into much about policing today, but there's a ways that we can incorporate everyday citizens who are not sworn officers into our police departments to provide support to perhaps maybe help us clear more cases. Yeah, we have all these principles, but you know one of the best ways to help reduce violence is clear more damn cases. That's not an easy approach, but it seems very elementary. And there are ways that we can support our police departments and ways that we can do that. So we cannot forget them in this conversation. Remember I talked about the uneven homicide victimization? Well, if you look at this blue line, this is the black homicide rate. This line here is the American Indian, Alaskan rate. And this is your Hispanic rate, right here. These are all higher in both Asian groups and white people. So you see, if you see differential disparities in imprisonment rates, let's not just scream, oh my God, discrimination and racism. Oftentimes, the justice system, again, does not control who comes through the front door. And oftentimes, we pay the damn cards the hand that we're dealt. And many times, it's not a winning hand. So this is understanding these things. So this is the uneven victimization. And mind you, victims and offenders tend to look alike. Maybe except for robbery, where it can be more of an interracial crime between strangers in places of leisure. Still, about 48% of those crimes occur between people of the same race and familiars. So we don't have a stranger crime problem. It's people that are familiar, that are in conflict, that we're dealing with. This kind of shows you a 20. Now mind you, let me just say this. I'm using the most updated data that I have on these slides. Some have 2020, some say 2023, some say 2021. And so, but you can all usually tell the same story because, trust me, year to year, things don't change that much. This kind of shows the rate. You see that black people still are the greatest risk, still about 8 times larger risk of being killed by the homicide than white people. Our lowest group, the least risk, are Asians. But look at this. And if you notice, I don't have Hispanic up there. Data's not there. The data is not there. This is 2022. So mind you, I hear people celebrating, oh, violent crime is going down in our cities in 2023. The people who have always bore the brunt of these crimes, they still continue to bear the brunt of them. And the reductions that we're seeing, a whole lot are not going to be in those areas. So those groups are still struggling. Our most vulnerable population. Switching over to gun violence. I promise I'm not getting to the politics of it. I'm just going to stick to the script. All right? But if you look at 2019, you see this big jump in homicides and murders from gun violence. Over 4,000 more souls were lost to gun violence in this year. 2021 is even higher. This is from the gun violence archives. You can go online. All these data, you can go online and you can get these data, all right? I have the links there. 2022, we see a slight decrease. 2023, we see a slight decrease. That is good news. But the one thing we don't talk about is this group, who are injured from gun-related injuries. That's sometimes over double the number, but nobody talks about it. Now, I read a study that said young black men, yes, we're the most high-risk group. But also, we think about it's a large, disproportionate portion walking around these communities who can't draw disability, and they are disabled. They can never join the workforce. If you take a whole set of these people who are the future of these communities and they can't work, what does it mean for that community? So we need to start considering and thinking about, what are the injuries and not just focusing on the homicides, because I guess, it draws more attention. But this is equally important to me, if not more. This is the defensive gun use has kind of gone down as well. But this is what I want to talk about. Suicide with firearm. That number continues to creep up. Don't have the numbers for 2023, but for right here, it's going to be higher than the last couple of years. So this is not what today is about, but gun violence also includes self-harm as well. Just really wanted you all to focus on this particular number. In 2021, there were roughly 10,000 more black people killed in 2021. Of that, about 7,700 or so came from this age group. And this is the ratio compared to the white male counterparts of the same age. So 15 to 19-year-old black males are 32 times more likely to be killed than their white male counterparts. And it's higher across the board. My God, you're talking about at 70 years old? Also, this shows if you have young black men who you see a die from homicide, it probably was due to a firearm. For young white males, it's around 80%. So it's still bad. And it's still the most at-risk group for those, for white people and white males. But it kind of shows you where our problems lie. And remember, whoever your quote-unquote black people are in your communities, these things will be very similar. So some key takeaways real quickly. Even though we saw declines, these drops have remained higher than the 2019 levels. And what we don't talk about, if you go back to 2018, things seem like they were bubbling in 2018. We saw an uptick in non-lethal, gun violence. And what the uptick that we saw in the pandemic was in lethal rates of gun violence. So I don't know if the guns have gotten more powerful, they have better ammunition, they have more guns, I don't know. But that is something that we saw in the data. I will say this, all gun violence is not the same. When I'm talking about gun violence, I'm talking about community gun violence or street violence. That makes up about 50% of the gun violence in the US. And again, we know that it's highly concentrated. Gun violence is really highly concentrated. Only about 4% of the US geography has experienced bloodshed from gun violence. It's highly concentrated. Also, the idea came up, we were talking about gun laws, and would that really have stricter gun control? Would that really have an impact on firearm or gun violence? It's not direct. We know there are more stolen guns. There are more guns manufactured and produced, and more guns have been stolen. I mentioned yesterday that these offenders are getting even smarter because they can kind of identify what type of vehicles may have guns. So it's not just randomly busting glasses. It's science behind it. And if they're getting smarter, that means we need to get smarter too. Mass shootings, a lot of news coverage makes that's not the bulk of shootings. And I said it yesterday, Memphis, Brooklyn, and Chicago, we have a couple of mass shootings every weekend. But that's not normally the case, and it's not random. It stems from beefs. And again, most firearms are gained illegally. A 15-year-old didn't go through the process to carry a firearm. I don't know about here, but I know in most states you can't be 16 and carry a handgun. And so most of these things, these guns are obtained illegally. So there are things that we can do to cut off the pipeline of stolen weapons. But this is what I mentioned yesterday as well. It used to take about 5 to 7 years for a gun to be in the black market before we see it being used in the crime. Since the pandemic, that's like 1 year now. Months to a year. So it's cycling through the black market much quicker. Again, in American cities, a small percent of the population is responsible for the majority of our crimes. In Washington, D.C., 200 people at any given time are responsible for the vast majority of the crimes that we see there. In Philadelphia, 1% of the population is responsible for 60 to 70% of the crimes, the serious crimes. So we know where it's occurring, and we have an idea of who's at greatest risk. That sounds like opportunity for intervention. And mind you too, those individuals who are more susceptible to environmental factors, to stresses and things, who are more likely to offend, are also more susceptible to treatment and intervention, and is more likely to take hold. So it is a gift and a curse. Just wanted you all to keep that in mind. And again, most acts are not random, but unfortunately, innocent bystanders get caught in the crossfire. We had a professor, a criminologist in our department. He went to Home Depot. There was a pool party in Buckhead, Atlanta, across the parking lot. Shots went out, and don't you know that he was shot in the arm? It could have been a lot worse. And it's funny because the wife told him not to go out anyway, but he went out and hard-headed, so I know she had a great time with that, right? But that kind of changes like when it hits close to home, right? And he has studied offending and victimization his whole career, but it really hit home that time. So this is the fun part for me. What's being done? Or even, a better question, what can we do? Well, let me tell you, we can't arrest and incarcerate our way out of this problem. That's not going to work. We put too much pressure on our courts, our probation and parole, and police to resolve a problem that is really not a justice problem, it's a human problem. And most people tend to age out of crime, right? Why does the deterrence effect weaken of incarceration and arrest? Most people age out. Now, the age curve is a little bit longer for young black males, maybe 3 to 4 years, but people age out. You also see, again, a relatively small proportion of people commit crimes, so like stop and frisk, that's not going to do it. And people say, well, we got guns off the street, we helped reduce crime. Yes, you did for the short term. The problem is still there. That's like simply treating, you have cancer. And I'm just gonna treat the symptoms, but I'm not going to get to the root of that cancer. Gun violence is only a symptom of a bigger cancer. And so trying to arrest our way out of it, to me, is irresponsible, but it's logical because we're desperate. And what other tools and recourse do we have? And you have a replacement effect. If I tell my students, I'm a dope boy, I'm a gang leader, I got a rival and the police come and lock them up, hell, I may have called the police on them. Maybe the no snitching model ethos didn't work. It only works when it doesn't come to my benefit. Thank you, officer. Thank you, court system. I don't have to commit a murder. I don't have to set them up. I don't have to rob them. You got rid of them for me. I'm going to slide right in and take their spot. This is why we can arrest and incarcerate our way out We need to hold people accountable. I'm not saying that. I'm being real. Now, let's talk about our approaches. Where am I on time?
35.
So I'm gonna try to talk about 10 or 15 more minutes. I want to save time to Q&A. All right, and I'll give you my contact information and all of that. We'll be hanging out if y'all want to grab a conversation. Now, people-based approaches, intelligence-driven approaches, not just for policing. Some of the better approaches like we've seen in places like San Antonio, Dallas even, they've taken a hotspots approach, intelligence-driven approach, and not just arresting people, but they need social services as well. These people need to be loved on. They need opportunities. And so the places that do it correct, they have a short-term, mid-term, and long-term plan. And so when I'm talking to you all about, and I say this always, like oftentimes it's just focusing on arrest and punishment that keeps us safer and help us feel better and safer. What about your grandkids? Wouldn't it be a shame, I said this yesterday, 50 years from now, got a me in front of a you all talking about these same things. I bet if you look back probably in 1990, history has repeated itself. We can't afford to do it. We have an opportunity to do better. Also, you want to engage individuals, build relationships. Once stabilized, you want to address their unsafe behavior, but we have to get at the mentality behind the behavior and what's driving the mentality behind the behavior. And again, punish those who persist with swift, certain, and fair punishment. Now, behavior-based approach. We know that we have to address broad-based efforts have not been, cookie-cutter approaches, they have not been effective. They're targeted. And so to enhance the effectiveness that facilitate violence, like carrying guns, gang banging, drug dealing, we need to focus on what's driving these behaviors while holding them accountable. You also have a place-based approach, but let me tell you, a place-based is also a time element, because all places are not more or highly criminogenic 24 hours a day. And when we forget the part of time, that's when over-policing comes in. So we have to remember not only place, but time. And so, problem-oriented policing, look, people don't want to be police officers, they don't want to be correctional officers. Hell, people are not joining our military. So we have to use intelligence, be smarter, technology. You know, some people say we need to get rid of all specialized units. Better oversight, better training, but also better intelligence. The robbery unit in Atlanta uses an intelligence-driven approach. We saw a decline in robberies. Baltimore and other places have taken this approach, intelligence-driven, and it works without increasing disparities. Because you think about reform, it's effectiveness and equity. And I would say even actionability. All right? Then you want to follow up this policing in these places with placemaking, building community gardens. You know, simple things like having community gardens, simple things like building parks and greenways, it helps reduce crime. And this is not correlational studies, it's causal studies that we're talking about. Rigorous evidence that shows this. And then also, you have to move beyond that to community building. We have to repair our communities because everybody's afraid of each other. There's no social cohesion in these areas. It's weakened and diminished. I'm going to talk about, before I end, some enforcement-driven principles, and then I'm going to focus on some non-enforcement. This is the holistic approach I'm talking about. So again, we're all familiar with hotspots policing, but it's not just doing hotspots, it's what you do, how people are treated. The one thing in San Antonio they use it for, we're going to police our butts off, but we're going to build relationships. And that makes me think that perhaps they're rewarding their officers for this behavior. So, if we want to see a certain type of policing, have to move beyond rewarding officers for running, gunning, and excuse my language, balls to the wall policing. That's only about 10% of the job. Your place network strategies. Mind you, a lot of these crimes happen in networks. A study out of Chicago showed that, what's that mean? No. A study out of Chicago showed that it was actually, out of one incident, based on a network, you had a retaliation. And it was something like, was it 600 to 700 incidents that flow from that one incident, whether it's gang, whether it's hood, whether it's turf. And you know, gangs are a lot different than they used to be when I was growing up. Not just Bloods and Crips. You have neighborhoods, you have crews, you have disruptions between gangs. You have beefs between people, units, and factions of the same gang. And so that makes it also a little bit harder to address gangs and understanding those things. But also we can understand where these networks operate by using risk terrain modeling or crime mapping. Intelligence-driven policing. But again, it's not just for policing, it's also an opportunity to concentrate social services. Because mind you, many of these people don't trust any people in the system. Social services, defense attorneys, because you are part of the system that they don't trust and have oppressed them over the years and has not done crap for them. This is what they see. Is that the truth or is it perceived? We know we worked hard, but people's perceptions are their realities, and that's what we're dealing with. So we have to be very mindful of those things, and then focus deterrence. I love focus deterrence. I don't know how to scale it up yet, right? But focus deterrence is an approach that centers the community. Like, instead of policing communities, shouldn't we empower communities to police themselves and we support them? Should we give them ownership of their own destiny? That's what focus deterrence does. You can use intelligence, talk to people, get intel, use probation and parole lists, try to find your repeat offenders. Everybody in the community knows who's the bad actors are. That grandma, Miss Jenkins, knows. The pastor, he knows. They all know. And so you bring them all in as an intervention. Then the person walks in and like, we're here because we love you, you drink too much. Well, you commit too much crime, you offend too much. And this is what we're gonna do. We're not gonna call you out, we're gonna call you in. If you keep this up, we're gonna nail you to the wall and you have the full support of this community behind us, your very community. But we're gonna change your evil ways. I feel like a prophet. We're gonna change your evil ways, right? We will support you. We will help you. We will empower you. We will invest in you. This has been very, very successful. Boston, it's called in Boston, the ceasefire. That was it, Operation Ceasefire. This is focus deterrence. We've seen it in other places that really work. I'm not gonna go through this part here, as I pretty much said it, but this is so you can see the key players. Police, prosecutors, probation, social services, outreach workers, community workers, right? The evidence shows that it works. Moderate to strong effects. Now mind you, it's still not a magic bullet. And I still don't necessarily know how to scale it up from the neighborhood to an entire community, to a section of town, the state, county level. I don't know, but those principles are there. A couple of some non-enforcement approaches. Now mind you, all these approaches still work with law enforcement. It's just that law enforcement is now more of a support role than a lead role. So for instance, in Oakland, I won't really go into talking about that because they had some issues, and right before the pandemic, they fell off, but we can still learn. The big issue was corruption, lack of trust, and political will. You gotta have political will. We saw reforms in Cincinnati where everything was great. They lost the political will, and things went back and turned downward. I'm gonna skip and talk about the Chicago Ready and like ROCA. Again, I'm not sure how to scale these things up, but you identify those people most at risk of gun violence. Not just offending, but to be victims. Because remember, victims often become offenders. And offenders have often been victimized. So what they do is they identify these individuals, they use behavioral therapy, they provide them supports, mentorships, help supply them with jobs. And the main focus is not necessarily arrest. Like ROCA in Baltimore is arrest. It's more offender focused. They take the same approach and they work with law enforcement because it's important that we build the gap in legitimacy of communities to law enforcement and law enforcement legitimacy to these communities, right? Because we can't clear cases if we don't talk to each other. 95% success rate in individuals being victimized of violent crime 2 years after involved in the Chicago Ready program. I think it's about a 95% non-recidivism rate for those belonging to ROCA in Baltimore. So you have these programs that take a multiple dynamic approach to resolving these issues. You also have your hospital-based interventions. Gunshot victims and their friends and family that come to the hospital, they're not necessarily thinking about, is this person okay? They want blood. They want revenge. And what this does, it intervenes to break up the immediacy of the moment and provide a cool down period. That's what it is, but it's not an end all be all like we discussed yesterday. It only disrupts the immediacy of retaliation. That's what it focuses on, but you need other supports. So it does its job, and we don't have evaluation of the long-term effects, but we know in the short term that we see reductions in retaliatory violence. Now remember, violence works in networks. And then this is one that we're just now getting hip to, that has been around for a minute. It's fairly new, it's been around, right? It didn't start yesterday. It's advanced peace. Now, we know that the American dream is a farce for many of our most vulnerable people. They probably will never achieve it and feel like they never will, even if they can. That's one of the places where a lot of these things see this stress, this strain, this conflict breeds from. Not having an economic identity. Can you imagine being an American in this capitalist society and you have no economic footprint, no economic identity? In America, you're less than human. That's how we view it. I can say that, right? We're all family, right? Right? And so, advanced peace does this. Now, mind you, we annually to gun violence and homicide. It's roughly $560 billion that it costs us. Now, I'm not even talking about the cost of human life, right? Not even talking about that we can't put a value on. So my thing is with this is by providing guaranteed income to those most at risk, either we're going to pay now or we're going to pay later. We decide how we want to pay. Can you imagine if we paid now and that $600 billion that I talked about, we were able to take that and reinvest that in all the beautiful things that you all are doing? This program also, what it does, it gives about $1,000 a month on average to these individuals deemed at risk. And of course, saying, oh, you're giving money to criminals and all these things. Well, we have to do something. You have to break up that immediate need for economic identity. And now, you can talk about getting my life together. You know, we talked yesterday, like, if you're trying to convert someone, you're evangelizing somebody and all these things, and they're sitting there and they're hungry, don't have a place to stay or any food to eat, get the hell out of my face, man. Give me a sandwich first, and then maybe I'll listen. How can we expect people to pull themselves up by bootstraps? They don't have it. Say it again? But they don't have it. They don't have any damn bootstraps. What a cruel, cruel reality. This is not a long-term thing. Not giving them $1,000 the rest of their lives, but we know that, like in Tennessee, if you're a man, forget having a criminal record. If you're a man, you don't qualify for social services. I can't get food stamps or SNAP because I'm a man. I just got to be hungry. But isn't this the group that's most at risk? Just, you have to support and see the value in all groups. This project here has shown that in Stockton, California, it had a reduction in a year of 21% in gun violence. We saw other reductions across the other 22 cities. Now, mind you, everything had been roses, and we hadn't seen these big impacts. But these success stories that had all the mentorship, had the state support, these are the things that really, really help. So it's not just the money. The money gives you access. Once we have them, you got to remember, those who are more susceptible to offending are more susceptible to treatment, or what I call love. All right? Let's see, I'm just about finishing up. Did I just put this in my pocket? See, I'm going to steal your clicker. Watch me. All right, so I've talked about this already. One thing that I really, you all have this, but I want to talk about why people carry guns, and I'm going to shut up. The at-risk groups are not carrying guns because they want to be killers. They don't want to be killed. They don't trust the police. They don't believe that the system will keep them safe. They're afraid somebody's going to hurt their family. They're going to be killed. So these are not killers. You got a bunch of scared people, untrained people, non-emotionally mature people with weapons coming face to face. When their identity, security tied in the street. And I said this yesterday, if you grew up in the hood or in these poor areas, the only thing you have is your reputation and your identity. Who wants to be the punk in the neighborhood? Who wants to be that person? You're fighting against that. So it may seem irrational to us. It's rational to those individuals. So you need to understand that these are not necessarily killers. You have some bad actors, I'm not saying that. But in general, this is not the case. Not even going here. I do want to show you before we quit. I think they're trying to talk about this, and I'm going to shut up right here. And then you all have talked about the change of pandemic and all that. We can wrap, all right? So, real quickly, affordable home credits. Our research shows from 2004 to 2017, most of the counties in the U.S., the counties that had authorized tax credits. I'm not even talking about building. They authorized, and now you authorize it means the plans are in place, right? You just don't, oh, I'm going to decide to build and build today. No, have to compare these places. We show that areas that have a higher density of affordable housing units. Because remember, you bring these units, it brings social services, it brings doctors, it brings stores, right? What we found was it's associated with reduced gun assaults and robberies, lower disparities of black-white violent arrests, race-neutral impacts on arrest types, and no effects on assaults against officers, meaning that it didn't make officers less safe. The problem is, since the recession, we were building up, and then we declined, and we haven't started building back up. And also, this program has not been profitable for those builders and developers. And guess what? They're not in the justice game, they're in the money game. We have to find a way to make it attractive, because what you find is, to make money, those low affordable prices sometimes are above market rent rates. Who can live there? And then after 10 years or so, there's no more restrictions. They can put everybody out in hell. They can just sell and do whatever. So we have to find ways to make it attractive and make them commit. But they won't commit if they can't make money. All right, that's the last thing. The one thing I want to show you all is this. This is crime in principal cities. And I'm going to move over, and you see, for white people in principal cities, non-lethal violence went up. Robberies and aggravated assaults. For black people in principal cities, it went down. But look at these other areas, your rural areas. They're all going up for black, white. What's this right here? This is black, white. It is all going up. The only place you see a decrease was among blacks in principal cities. Now look at our Hispanics. It's going up across the board. Suburbs, countryside, and the cities. So when they say, oh, we're winning the battle against violent crime, call BS. Because violent crime is not necessarily being dissolving. It could be being displaced because people moved during the pandemic. And we have an evolving crime market. I'm going to shut up right there because I can have 10 minutes at least to ask questions and talk to y'all. But thank y'all for listening, not going to sleep. Thank y'all for listening. So I'm not sure how much time we have, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
You got 7 minutes.
You have 7 minutes. Yes.
Could you talk a little more about what risk terrain modeling is?
Yes. So the question is, what is risk terrain modeling? Risk terrain modeling is a more advanced version of crime mapping. You use artificial intelligence, machine learning to train the algorithms to identify those areas, not just hotspots, but more accurately identify the hotspots within the hotspots. And that gives us intel to go in where do we need police, but also, like in San Antonio, where do we need to distribute and concentrate our social services and mental health supports and things like that. So it's an AI-driven tool that's a more advanced version of the traditional crime mapping that we see.
And who drives that? Law enforcement? Who drives it?
So some agencies have it, of course, like with facial recognition technology. I didn't talk about that. It's a big debate about that, and our research shows that, that facial recognition technology can help decrease homicides without increasing disparities in arrests or even increasing the number of arrests. And so you have the police agencies, some who, many of the agencies you see the downturn in crime since the pandemic really, though I guarantee you they are using risk terrain mapping or some type of artificial intelligence-driven approach to understand where the crimes are located. And really, the software developers, Amazon, Microsoft, these other places, they're the ones who are really creating these things, and we need a better relationship to understand how to calibrate, how to maintain. This is a spot that we can find non-sworn people, instead of trying to get sworn people to support our sworn officers. Because look, we have to think about the realities that we're in. And so, yes, law enforcement is using it, but it's a much smaller amount than it used to be, but it's a lot more than it was before the pandemic. But this stuff has been around for a while. We're just not really, I guess, starting to trust or we're desperate enough to use it. Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a question
Yes.
about data.
Yes.
So, data's only as good as the input.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a huge population of mixed race people. You know, in New Mexico, very rarely are you gonna find somebody that's
Mm-hmm.
only Hispanic, only Native American, only white, only black. And so when we collect data, they have to pick. And so that really skews our data. Any suggestions on a better way to collect data? I mean, just an example, I had an African-American white mixed young man, and we do self-reporting. He was, well, what's the Samoan? And I started like, for the Samoan Islands, and he goes, well, I wanna be that today. And I'm like, no, you can't, you have to be something that you really are. But, how do you, that really skews our data, and it really makes it hard to focus in on disparities, because you don't really know what they are.
You know, that is a wonderful question, and something we kind of broached yesterday. So I do think that you need to have observer-reported data and the self-reported data. And what it allows you to see, what are those gaps, right? Are there gaps there? But not just only at intake, like into the jail facility. Police officers, we need to adopt this. See, the federal government, this is the approach they take with the NPS, and they weighed up, and I think it gives us a more accurate account, or more accurate, not necessarily inaccurate. But I think if you start doing this, so imagine if you have a police department, where when an officer arrests someone, they ask the person, I was an officer, and I was like, yeah, you look black and I wrote black. I mean, I've been guilty of it too, right? You know, oh, you're a white guy, so I'm gonna put it down. They're not asked. What if you had observer reported, and you had them self-report? And not just at arrest, but when they're at intake, and then when the prosecutor's office or defense attorney, whoever talks to them, during their stays. Now what it does, it allows us to understand where are there gaps, right? Are there consistencies of what this person is feeling Samoan that day? Was this person just feeling that, right? And I think it's important that we make sure that we get the ethnicity and ask, are you Hispanic or not? Simple as that. Yes or no. If you think, I see your last name, it may be married, and I know, then as an observer, you can say, all right, I'm gonna put this down. And you use that data to kind of get an understanding, are there divergence somewhere? And really just have that multi-stage safeguard is the best way. And of course, that's gonna take time to understand that. But that's the only way that I can see by putting those policy and things in place at those different levels to really understand. Because you wanna understand ethnicity, and you also wanna understand race. So you will start to find some concentration there. And hell, you may find that, I don't know, maybe everybody's feeling Samoan that week, I don't know, but you'll be able to pull those things out. And that's really the only way that I can think that we can kind of safeguard, who's coming in, who's coming out. And this is an important thing. If I identify, you see me as a black person, but I identify as Hispanic black, and I'm really intact with my Hispanic lineage, there could be something personal that impacts me. So we need to be mindful of that as well as when it comes to misclassifying people. So those are the only ways that I think we can do so, by having self-reported, observer-reported at those various stages, and having somebody smart enough to go through the data and understand, we're seeing these things here. Maybe you could ask another question. Well, is your mom or dad, what do they identify as, right? These types of things. And of course, you're gonna have some missing data, because everybody knows they may not want to answer that, they may not know, but it starts to give us a better picture of what's going on, and understanding, are there mismatches between parental stuff, mismatch between how they identify. So just really, it's complicated, it's complex, but self-report, observer-reported, different steps is about all I can think of as being a great way forward. And that doesn't cost a lot of money and require a big change. One more, anybody else? No criticisms? No pushback? Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yes.
Some of the programs that you were describing, I think it was advanced peace or those types of things. In a lot of these, what is the incentive? In other words, are there strings attached? Are there court orders? Are these people that are mandated to participate to get these benefits?
So that's the thing too. You have a selection issue there, but I don't necessarily see it being a bad thing, because it's still part of your at-risk group, and we can learn, high-risk group, and we can learn. None of these things that I know of have been court ordered. This has been people out using violence interrupters and other social service providers, social workers out there identifying probation parole officers, identifying these people most at risk, understanding these networks, right? So it's a lot of boot on the ground intel that's gathered. And you provide them a way forward. You know, many of these people, everybody, people say I offer this sometimes nobody wants to hop on, but a lot do. And what we're doing is we're creating leaders in our communities and creating proof of concept for those who may not have been on board at first. And so the only string attached on the advanced piece is like, if you're not doing these things, you're gonna cut off your monthly stipend. Right? So that's one thing there. With the others, it's more of an internal thing. It's more connecting relationship. Because many people in these conditions, they want to be out. Most of these folks don't want to be there. So that's for me has been, you talk about incentive, there has been like really incentives like court order. These have been more of self-selection, if that makes sense.
And so my next question, the next question would be then, and we talked a little bit about this at my table last night, was do you have to be in the criminal justice system to access these programs?
No. They try to, so a lot of these individuals have criminal justice involvement, but it's more preemptive than not. So you're trying to identify those who, yes, who have been victimized, but those who are following the trajectory to be victimized and trying to cut it off like they did. So you have a mix of high-risk individuals who are both, some have been adjudicated and some haven't. But you do have that, it counts for the recruitment on the ground. Yes, I think that's it. It's time for me to shut up. Thank you all. Great questions.